Hello and welcome to Boat Talk, where we talk about all the ings of boats, as in repowering, operating, building, and this week, maintaining and anchoring. We are your hosts. I'm Justin Riggy, the VP of Manufacturing and Engineering, and this is Corey Schmidt, the VP of Operations. So these days we just get so many calls, we can't answer all the questions.
So many calls.
A
Ridiculous amount of calls.
And emails. So we thought we'd start this podcast to answer the questions for all you guys to hear.
And learn and share with your friends.
Yeah.
Spread the good word.
Yeah. So if you'd like to be a guest or a caller on our show, email us at boattalk@sbmar.com. That's BOATTALK at SBMAR.com.
You realize I haven't set that email up yet. I'll do it right away.
There goes that take.
Boattalk at SBMAR.
On today's show, we're going to be talking to the Monk Trawler group. We got a couple of callers from the Monk Trawler group. And yeah.
We should throw a picture up of a Monk Trawler so people know what it looks like.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
We'll do that. We'll put it
right here.
So one of the things we wanted to do on this very first episode was talk a little bit about how we got to now. You know, the Tony Athens enigma.
Yeah. So I'll take that one on since Tony Athens is my father-in-law. So Seaboard Marine has been around for a long, long time. Tony Athens is one of those stories that you hear about where a guy started in his garage. Right.
Literally.
He literally started in his garage. Tony's the ultimate tinker. He's a machinist. He's kind of a
self-taught engineer.
What do they call him? Evil genius, right? he has a mechanical mind, a mechanical brain. He can fix and work on anything. And so in the 80s, he did exactly that. What he calls walk the docks, right? He'd have his tool bags and he'd go down to the docks and he would fix people's engines and work on their boats. And he started from that. And here we are today.
Right.
40 years later.
And who got him into the boat thing?
His brother, Timmy.
Yeah, it's always the brother.
Timmy. So if you've seen, any of you out there that are familiar with Seaboard Marine, if you've seen or ever got a free t-shirt from placing an order on the website, which I hope you have, his boat is on the back of every t-shirt. It's the Outer Banks boat, and that's Timmy's boat. So both Tony and Timmy worked together to build that boat in their mom's backyard at Silver Strand Beach in Oxnard.
Yep.
Okay, so there's a lot of history, a lot of story. I won't go into all the details, but that's the basics of it.
Yeah, and he built a name for himself, and he moved from his garage to a shop to a bigger shop, and then expanded into all these spaces now. And now Seaboard Marine has become this. I don't know what you'd describe us, but it's quite a.
It's something.
It's something. Whatever it is, it's something.
It's something.
And we're just here trying to hold on, like a rodeo cowboy.
Yeah, and that's why we're here. We're trying to spread the good word and get as much information and knowledge out there as humanly possible.
Yeah, and we both spent, between us, we got over 20 years of working here, soaking it all in. He sits right next to Tony every day. I'm sorry.
I do. That's where all the information came from.
Exactly. And I worked with Tony as his exhaust apprentice and just picked his brain at every opportunity. And now I do a lot of the manufacturing and product development stuff. So it's been quite a ride.
Yep, it's still going.
All right, so now we're going to go to some phone calls. Let's see if we can get Neil on the line here from the Monk Trawler Group. Hello, and welcome to Boat Talk.
Hi there. This is Neil Skoglund from Portland, Oregon calling. Hoping to get some insight and advice about my Monk 36, a 2005 little trawler with a single Cummins.
Okay. And Neil, I understand you're part of a trawler group, a Monk Trawler Forum or something like that?
Yeah, there's a Monk 36 Owners Association that's been active for a number of years. It's a friendly and supportive forum that deals with Q&As from rookies like me to more experienced owners. And oftentimes we can get some expert advice within our own group, and sometimes we get to call experts like Justin and Corey for some help and advice.
Awesome. Yeah, that's why we started this podcast, because we can't get to everyone who calls in, so we're trying to answer the questions for everyone to hear. So,
Fantastic.
so I hear you guys have a rendezvous coming up.
We're gathering here on the West Coast. There's another gathering on the East Coast here in June. So here on the West, it's in Anacortes, Washington, June 10th through the 12th, 13th. We have monksters, we call ourselves, from around the Pacific Northwest that are traveling in, but we have in particular a boat that's coming up from Santa Barbara. The Kachina is just off the Oregon coast right now, and it's going to be fantastic, exciting to see.
He's steaming all the way up from Santa Barbara to Anacortes, Washington.
They are.
That must be a long journey in a trawler.
It's a long journey in a trawler. It's especially a long journey in a relatively small boat. But our members, Chris and Pam Sellers, have made the voyage several times. It's very impressive to other owners like me that stay way closer to home.
Okay, cool. Wow. So, so I understand you guys have some questions, some topics that have been bouncing around the forum that you'd like us to answer. Can you tell us what's been going on in the forum?
Well, since we just talked about Kachina, Chris and Pam, they represent one of the issues. I know that they have been doing work on their propeller sizing, and it's a topic that comes up often about how an owner determines what the correct prop size is. We have a variety of engines that are used in our hulls, and generally know that you match a propeller to your hull and its engine power. But there are people that run bigger and smaller props than others.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could review for us how you make that decision.
Yeah. So
and maybe particularly about whether you consider only its wide open throttle, or maybe you think about the torque peak from the engine.
yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because with trawlers it's a little different, right? I mean, with our typical, we do a lot of commercial fishing boats and pleasure boats that are planing hulls, and Tony's typical thing is always make sure that you can slap right against the governor at wide open throttle, right? And then if you have an electronic engine, of course, you can look at your prop curve and make sure that the fuel burn relative to RPM. We have all those on our website for Cummins, but if you had a different engine, you could find that information, and you want to stay below your fuel burn curve at any RPM. But with trawlers, it's a little different. You guys go slow. You guys are sipping fuel. Tony says you guys are kind of like a little bit of the mentality of a sailboater without dealing with the sails, but you're worried about how much money you're spending on fuel. So you're looking for that efficient cruise just above hull speed. So people tend to run a little bit larger props on a trawler where you may not be able to make wide open throttle, and that's okay. You could be 200 RPM, let's say, shy of your rated wide open throttle RPM. If you're 1,000 RPM shy of your wide open throttle RPM, that's kind of a problem, right? You could be overloaded.
100%. Yeah, that's where what you mentioned before with peak torque comes into play as well, right? We're trying to find that equilibrium between the hull characteristics of the boat and the maximum efficiency of the engine. And when you can find that spot and prop it accordingly, then you've maximized the maximum efficiency of the whole entire configuration.
And I personally think one of the best ways to prop boats is based on real world. Tony's always been a big proponent of just what's really happening out there in the real world and not going off of what some engineer does on a fancy, simulation. And so the best thing is you guys have a group and you guys have all these different boats, all these data points, right? And so I would say the best thing would be to have a good database of what size prop, what size engine, what size boat, what the weight of the boat is, how it's set up. And, you always have to tweak a little bit, but I think one of the key things that takeaways is for trawlers, you should probably generally be not quite able to make wide open throttle, because when you're down at that hull speed, you're going to run a little more efficient. Because if you look at the prop curve or the fuel burn curve, you're going to be way below. So the engine's going to be kind of free spooling. You're going to be spending a little bit of fuel just making the RPM with the engine because there's not much load on it. And that's where going a little what we would call overpropped in the planing boat world is ideal for a trawler, because now you're gonna load up the engine just a little bit more at a little lower RPM, and it's still not going to be overloaded by any means at the cruise speed, but it's going to run a little more efficiently. You're not stroking the pistons as many times for no reason,
Okay, well, we actually do have data about who's running what props. I happen to be running a 22-inch pitch prop that seems to be one of the smaller props on a boat with my engine. Some other people have 23 and 24.
And where are you at wide open throttle?
I can reach wide open throttle.
Okay. So you arguably might be
I might be considered underpropped.
Right.
Where somebody with a 24-inch pitch might be considered slightly overpropped.
Neil, do you find that a lot of the boat owners in your community have a wide variety of weights on their boats, or do you find that the boats are have similar weights?
There is a variety.
Right.
Some people sit significantly lower in the water. I'm carrying way more tools probably. Although compared to the weight of the boat, it's no real big deal. 100 pounds here or there compared to our 10-ton boat doesn't matter. But yes, one of our owners that's semi-famous in the community, a fellow named Jim Healy, said that when he moved off the boat, his waterline raised by 5 inches.
Yeah, and some people are hoarders and they have everything, everything in the kitchen sink in their boat. Yep. And some people run a clean, organized boat that doesn't have much extra weight.
Right. When you're talking about propping,
weekenders versus liveaboards.
Right.
Right. Jim and Pam were liveaboards for years and years. And other people use their boats for weekend trips and stay pretty close to their port and still don't really need to carry a lot.
Right. And when you talk about propping a vessel, and we could talk about any vessel out there, weight is really the biggest factor, because that's what's loading up the engine, right? Based on the propeller size, right? A ton of weight between two very similar boats can be a significant difference in how you would prop the vessel, right? So I think when you look at propping, weight is one of the biggest factors that needs to be evaluated.
Yeah, encourage you. Does your database have weight in addition to the prop specs and the length and?
I would say no. We have both Taiwan-built boats and Canadian, Nova Scotia-built boats, and we think that the Canadian boats are a little bit heavier than the Taiwanese, somewhat because they're carrying a bigger engine normally, and maybe because of the layups, but there's so much variation in what people think their weight is.
Right.
Maybe I think that our weight is around 22,000 pounds, but the very uncertain travel lift scale said 24,000 one time and 20,000 another time. Yeah. So it's difficult to know with any precision how much weight we're carrying.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I think the main takeaway is that the trawlers don't quite have to make that wide open throttle. That was the original question, but you also don't want to be way off. You don't want to be really over lugging the engine down where it doesn't even get anywhere near wide open throttle. So there's a happy medium there somewhere between not quite making wide open throttle or barely making it, and then maybe being a couple hundred RPM under. And
you would think that the choice would be around 200 to 300 RPM would be the scale of how much under wide open throttle you'd be.
Yeah, and the only exception, I'd say the only exception to that is if anybody ever does actually run wide open on any regular basis, let's say they have to go through a hollow, an inlet or something like that, or they have, I don't know, just for whatever reason, they hammer down on any kind of regular basis, then they should be able to make their wide open throttle. But if they never, and a lot of you trawler guys never move, you just barely you come out of the harbor and then you just kind of like think about touching the throttle, and that's about it, right?
That's all you need.
That's the beauty. That's what Tim Athens does, right? He comes out and he just goes, boop,
he just wills it, mind power.
Barely touches it above an idle, and then there's just cruising just to sip fuel. So if that's the case, then yeah, you're fine being a little overpropped in the traditional sense. All right, you have any other topics?
One for us, and it applies to some of our other long-range cruisers, is Spares that people recommend are carried. Again, many of our boats stay relatively close to home, but some like us plan to be long-range cruisers that carry belts and anodes and filters and such, and scratch our heads about, well, should we be carrying spare, fill in the blank.
Right.
Coolant pumps, alternator, starter. I know that Tony Athens had the opinion that if you don't have a starter, you don't got nothing. But I bet that
Sounds
there
like
are
a country
very
song.
many starters in drawers on our boats. So if you could address some of that, so that would be of general interest to our group.
Yeah. I mean, it varies so widely, and it's a personal choice. I mean, some people are
risk management,
right. Some people are OCD and they want to have one of everything. But I think a lot of it, if you're just approaching it from sort of a balanced, pragmatic thing, it really comes down to what you're doing, right? Where you're going to be.
100%. You would consider it an application-based approach, right? Like you said before, if you tend to hang around and you're only going out, 10, 20 miles at a time, and it's on the weekend and the weather is nice, it would be a little, I guess, somewhat silly to have hundreds of pounds of spares because it's kind of unnecessary. And so the obvious thing would be if someone's doing a trip, let's say from Santa Barbara up to Anacortes, right, like our friends, then it might make sense to carry a few more components that would make life easier. I mean, I know a lot of the trawlers that are heading up the coast aren't too far away from marinas and things of that nature, but again, you have to kind of manage out what's going to be needed. So you might decide if you have a pretty dynamic DC system on the boat that's pretty well distributed, that you might want to carry a spare alternator because you're having heavy loads. That would be a good idea. And obviously for boats that are traveling hundreds of miles offshore, my recommendation, I think our recommendation would always be to carry heavy components, right? Because if you're 100 miles offshore, there's no Walmart and there's no Seaboard and there's no one else that's going to have parts that you're going to be able to acquire quickly. So I think the further away you are, the more things you need to carry is probably the rule of thumb. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our guys out here on the West Coast of we're here in Ventura County. They go out to the islands, and there's on any weekend when you go fishing, like you guys are going tomorrow.
We're going tomorrow.
There's going to be probably 20, 30, 40 boats out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so you really don't need a lot of spares in that, and you're only an hour from home.
Right.
And Vessel Assist could be out there, as you know from personal experience.
I do know from personal experience that Vessel Assist will come and get you. Yes.
Yeah. So you don't need much, but if you're going to like the Caribbean or something where it's going to be harder to ship, but we knew one extreme example, Roy Rayner, who's no longer with us recently, unfortunately, but he told us a story one time that he sailed or motored from Hawaii to the West Coast with a boat.
He sure did.
He loaded that thing down with barrels and barrels and barrels of fuel. I guess it was riding low in the water. And in that kind of situation, you better have a spare everything, right?
I'd bring a spare boat. Honestly, that's what I would do.
So
none of our boats would be expected to be ocean crossers.
Yeah.
An adventure.
Take you a couple years.
Some of us, our boat included, we intend to be up the Canadian coast and away from significant sources of spares and service. So
yeah,
we're thinking about those things that we should carry.
Yeah, alternator.
And, in today's environment, also we're thinking about what delays we might have in getting a part into a place where we can get service.
Sure. But
there doesn't happen to be a water pump there, and we have to wait for a week to get it.
Right. Well, I would say, if you like to be prepared and you got the budget for it, anything that you can unbolt and bolt on in the matter of an hour or two in the water with the tools you carry aboard, why not have a spare? Unless you're just really local. If you're boating really local, obviously you're not going to carry spare pistons or flywheels or any internal
hang-on components.
Yeah, like an alternator, your starter.
100%.
I mean, anything that why not have it if it's something you could replace easy enough and just be back up and set an anchor and be back and let the wife have some lunch and some wine, some cheese and wine, and be back up and running in a few hours.
Yeah, I agree. I think anytime you're going to leave your home port for any extended length of time, it makes sense to have spare hang-on components. If storing them against how much space you have is practical, right? I know some boats are smaller than others, but to carry a spare alternator and a spare starter and some belts and impellers and filters seems to be worth the space it would consume.
Maybe a seawater pump even.
100%.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Fantastic.
Cool. How we doing on the technical side over there? All right. You have any other topics you'd like us to cover?
One that is near and dear to the Seaboard's heart, and Justin and Corey did some work for us, is on our exhaust system.
Oh, yeah.
On our 2000s Cummins, where Mr. Athens is pretty passionate about not liking Cummins' standard exhaust system.
Right.
But there's a whole bunch of us out there. We happen to have changed, but there's a whole bunch of engines out there with the stock mixing elbow. So in our fleet, the big question is, assuming that we don't all make a change today, what should we be looking for to decide whether our mixing elbow might be a problem tomorrow?
Good question. So the first question, you know the Monks better than I do. So my first question to you is just in general terms, where is the turbo in relation to the waterline? Is it generally the turbo? And some of these boats might not have turbos. I would say the exhaust manifold outlet, where the exhaust comes out of the engine, whether it's the turbo or the manifold. How is that? Is that above or below the waterline in general?
It is above the waterline by perhaps 3 to 4 inches for most engines. Mm-hmm. There are some non-turbo Perkins powered, and also some older Ford Lehman and Ford American that are non-turbo, but most of our fleet is Perkins or Cummins turbo. Okay,
so if you're only 3 to 4 inches above the waterline, I'm guessing that the boat builder typically would put in a lift muffler. So if they use the factory elbow, they go to a lift muffler that lifts the water up and out. And if everything goes well, that can work. And it was kind of the standard, industry standard, up until kind of Tony came on the scene. I mean, Tony kind of changed things, because the way you would deal with a turbo below the waterline in the past, or the traditional way I would say before maybe the 80s, was just they slap in a lift muffler. The lift muffler holds an artificially low water line, right? Because the exhaust gas pushes the water down and out the dip tube and lifts it. That's why it's called a lift muffler, up and overboard, right? And so if everything goes okay with the lift muffler, then in theory it should be okay. The problem is if you get a little crack in the hose or something goes wrong, gravity never fails. Hoses fail, clamps fail, components can leak. And if you don't have a solid positive airlock, then water can make its way back into the lift muffler and potentially up to the exhaust or the exhaust outlet or the turbo or whatever.
Close enough to it.
Yeah. So if somebody has a lift muffler that's well placed and well laid out, so so that water line in the lift muffler is 12 inches below the exhaust outlet, it can work okay. But what Tony kind of was looking at all these guys that like to go to dry exhaust, and he goes, these guys with dry exhaust, they don't have to deal with water. And then you got these guys with wet exhaust that they do everything wet, but it's kind of a problem sometimes. And so he said, well, what if we put the two together? Let's do a little bit of dry exhaust, and then we go wet. And I happen to have my mixer. I'm using a mixer for one of Tony's style mixers as my phone stand right now. But so what we like to do is come out of the manifold or turbo, come up above the waterline 12 inches, and then aim down to the to the lift muffler. And you can still keep the lift muffler, and the advantage of that is they're quiet. Lift mufflers are very quiet, and it's just a little extra security because that also helps keep water out. But if you can get a little riser, and I would definitely recommend this, like if you get to a point where your factory elbow starts leaking or is rusted and you got to replace it, and they cost you $1,000 or $2,000 anyway, spend the extra money at that time. Don't buy another one of those. Replace it with a proper riser. So we do some dry exhaust up and over, and then we introduce the water going down towards the lift muffler. And if you can get that dry rise higher than the lift muffler gooseneck, they call it the gooseneck. That's what comes out of the lift muffler and goes up and over. If you can get it higher than that, then, and Tony has pictures of this, if you look at how to design, or like designing a marine exhaust system or something like that, you can see Tony will show this like side view where you've got the the dry exhaust going up higher than the gooseneck of the lift muffler output. That's the best case scenario, because then water could never get into your engine. But if you have a good hose and good clamps and the lift muffler is properly installed, is it like an emergency? You need to rip it all out and replace it, tomorrow? Probably not. I'm a little bit of a pragmatist on that. Tony's kind of like, he doesn't really compromise on, he's like, no, you just got to do it, because, there is some risk there. There is some risk. If things go wrong, your engine could be flooded or worse. So, but they've worked in many cases for many people.
Yeah. I would add to that and say that as a part of the exhaust on a boat like yours, I would be inclined to add an assessment as a part of, your, let's say, annual review or whatever you want to do with your vessel. And assessing the exhaust system is part of the process, right? Because a lot of boat owners don't even know whether there's an issue or not, right? And they'll just keep on motoring. And one of the things you can do is, if you do have a turbo diesel, is just to pull the elbow off of the turbo and visually inspect the outlet of the turbocharger, right? And it's pretty obvious, and you can see a lot of pictures on our website, and we talk to a lot of guys that go through this process. But you pull the elbow off and look inside the outlet of the turbo, and it'll be very obvious whether there's water intrusion into the engine. Most turbos that don't have any water intrusion are very velvety and smooth, and the tolerances are very tight. It's very sooty and dark. And if you do have water intrusion issues, you would pull that elbow off and look inside, and it looks bumpy and gross, and there could be rust and all kinds of other things going on. And I think, for boat owners that, where there may be some sort of, potential issues because of the designs historically, once a year, pull off the elbow and just look. If everything looks fine, replace the gasket, put it back on, and check it again the year afterwards, right?
Yep.
And then is my design standing the test of time? Or if not, I'm going to find that issue hopefully in time before my engine, ingests raw water into it, right? And have a catastrophic failure. And
that's the thing too, is that when the mixing elbow fails, it's like a silent killer. What is that? What's the silent killer? The
widowmaker?
Yeah,
the coronary,
like pancreatic cancer or something like that.
I don't know. Yeah.
Whatever. It's the silent killer. You don't see it. You don't see anything because the external part of the elbow is cooled by water, and it's painted, and it stays all shiny and painted and looks brand new.
Right.
The inside, where all the heat and salt water is what corrodes out. So you don't see it. So Corey's right. If you are going to run that exhaust, even though, like I said, you don't have to tomorrow like rip everything out just to be safe, just to give yourself that extra safety factor, you do kind of need to inspect it on some regular interval. Otherwise, you'll never know if you catch it early enough, you might still save your turbo, save your engine, because it tends to be a slow leak at first, and you'll see a little bit of hint of crystals, or
it'll be a mist. Yeah. It'll just start misting the engine, right?
Yep. And it won't be too bad at first. So if you catch it in time, then you can do your riser before it's too late. And we've had a lot of customers where I've done risers for that they didn't have to replace their turbo because they just happened to catch it in time.
Okay, well, that's exactly what we're looking for, is what should we be looking for. And that simple visual from disconnecting the elbow sounds like extremely practical advice. When we took our insulation shroud off, we saw a trace of rust on the outside. And that might not have had anything to do with what was happening inside, but that's what made us nervous and had us call Corey and Justin and ask for a dry exhaust that you did for us last year.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And did you see any signs of water in your turbo, or you have a BT? So, yeah. You see any signs of water in your turbo outlet?
We did not.
Oh, good.
We didn't find any defects on the inside, but the way that those things are constructed, there really isn't a way for us to do an inspection on the saltwater side of the elbow. So
it's just hard to get to in that boat.
Well, even when you have it in your hand, what you're seeing is the hot exhaust side, right? And there could be a crack that's about to open on the saltwater side. You can't tell.
It's true.
You can't inspect it.
Right. Yeah.
So we, because we had a leak on the outside, we made the change. Other people that have completely solid elbow from outside, I wouldn't make that decision. And now that you give us the advice to just take a peek inside, that seems terribly practical.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. All right. Well, did you have any other topics?
Well, again, being a relatively new owner that's learning with the fire hose, one of the things that's just a general topic is things a trawler owner should know.
Things a trawler owner should know.
Well, like we talked about before, I think propping is a big one, right? Understanding the characteristics of the boat, how the boat operates based on the shape of the hull and what hull speed even is in a boat like that.
That's a good point. Understanding hull speed and
yeah, I mean, when you talk about boats in general, like Justin was saying earlier, you have planing boats, you have hull speed boats, displacement boats,
semi-displacement,
right? Semi-displacement, and when you go and approach the idea in theory of how the engine is going to be loaded and how you're going to prop that vessel, that's the first thing you think about is what's the hull characteristics of this boat. Now, obviously, a trawler has very unique hull characteristics, and that boat is really designed to run at hull speed. And hull speed is that magic speed where as the boat travels through the water, you're essentially riding your own wave, right? And that is the most efficient speed that hull is designed to go. And so anyone who has a trawler, obviously you would expect that they would know that. They're not going to be expecting they're going to get up on plane and run 20 knots. But when it comes to propping the vessel, knowing that characteristic of the boat is super important.
Yeah, I wonder how many. It's kind of worth mentioning what makes the difference between a planing boat and a displacement hull, and it's actually is the way that the back of the boat is shaped, where the bottom meets with the stern. It's called the quarter beam buttocks angle.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a funny term.
Love that.
Quarter beam buttocks angle. And it basically, if you look at a sailboat or a trawler, the back of the boat slopes back up towards the stern. And the reason that is because your bow makes a wave, and then that wave goes down, and the period or whatever the distance of the wave, it rides back up, and a trawler or a sailboat is designed to kind of push off of that wave. That's why it's sloped back up. That's why sailboats are so curvy on the bottom. And so that means no matter what engine you put in that boat, you push it faster and faster, it's just going to suck itself down into the water deeper and deeper.
And the fuel consumption required to make a hull of that characteristic, like a trawler, to go faster and faster, the amount of fuel, and let's just call it horsepower required, becomes exponentially higher and higher for every bit of more speed that you're looking to get. So if you want to gain a knot past the most efficient point of the hull speed, it's going to take an exponential amount of fuel. Again, the next knot would take an even the hockey stick curve,
right?
Required amount of fuel or horsepower to do it. So trawlers are set what they are. Now, the only thing you have to work with after that is the amount of weight the vessel has on it. And that's the only thing that's going to affect the performance of the engine, is how much it weighs given the characteristics of the hull.
Right. But even if
we see that with our owners, that our hull speed is very close to 8 knots.
Sure.
And those people with 135 horsepower engines, they run about the same speed and consume about the same amount of fuel as us that have the 220 horsepower engine.
Right.
And those that have the 330 horsepower engine, they can open it up and suck a bunch of fuel very quickly, but they pretty much settle back down to 8 or 8.5 knots very quickly also.
Right. And Tony developed an article, and this is one of the first articles I learned when I started, learning about boats and getting into the industry. His article is "Propellers Move Boats, Engines Just Turn Them," and it's a neat article because it really dives, kind of technically into that, and basically talks about that. The propeller is the only thing moving the boat. You could have 1,000 men inside of the boat turning a crankshaft, and the boat is still going to do, irregardless of weight, obviously, but the boat is still going to travel the same speed as long as you're moving that propeller at the same speed. So a lot of times, and this is one of the misnomers out there, you hear guys all the time, they say, "I want more horsepower." If I just had more horsepower.
Right.
And it goes to what your point, which is, having more horsepower isn't going to really provide the value that you think it is, right? Because the boat is going to do what the boat wants to do.
Right.
You can throw all the horsepower you want at it, but it's not going to do that. So what makes the most sense in boats like trawlers is to find the most economical engine within that range that makes sense, about the amount of horsepower required and the amount of fuel burn to get you to where you need to be.
Right.
You don't need to put a 600 horsepower engine in there, right? You just need something that's going to let the engine operate at its peak performance.
Right. Yep.
Okay. All right.
So, you mentioned kind of the top 5 things that a trawler owner should know. So we talked about propping. That's a big one. We talked about carry-ons. I think that's a good one. We talked about exhaust. That's a huge one. Everybody should look at their exhaust and understand exhaust.
100%.
We have lots of great articles on exhaust on our website, and they apply to all the brands of engine. Doesn't have to be a Cummins. And then one of the ones we haven't talked about that we get a lot of calls about is smoke. And before we get into the smoke, I want to ask you, how many are any of the boats, any of these trawlers aftercooled?
The 330 horsepower Cummins
How,
are 6 BTAs.
yeah, how many do you have? You have a 6BT, right?
He has a 220.
We have a 6 BT at 220.
So you're not aftercooled.
Perhaps out of our fleet of 250 or so boats, there are less than 10 aftercooled boats.
Okay, yeah. So that's a common one for causing smoke. If you have an aftercooled boat and all of a sudden you start seeing smoke and you call me and I say, well, when's the last time you serviced your aftercooler? And you say, what's an aftercooler? There's your problem.
That's my favorite response.
Right? But you guys that don't have the aftercoolers deal, that's nice. That's one of the nice things about the trawler, right? You don't need that much horsepower to do what you want to do because you don't want to burn a lot of fuel and you just want to cruise and enjoy. So you don't have to deal with that. But some of the causes of smoke, do you guys ever have smoke appear in your forum as a complaint or a question?
Yes, it does come up. Most recently for Perkins Power.
Okay. And we talking
some
about
speculation about whether one of the cylinders wasn't getting complete combustion. And I will go back and ask about service interval while we're talking about smoke. That after-cooler service interval is going to be one of the significant questions for those people that own the big engine.
Yeah, I mean, that comes down to a couple of factors. If you freshwater flush your boat, that helps a lot. If you leave your engine sitting with fresh water in it, the aftercooler, you might spread it out to 3 years, maybe 4, just depending. Some guys like to pull them, every other year or so, I'd say.
Maintenance on, I would add that when we talk about maintenance, and we talk about aftercoolers, I would include the heat exchanger and the transmission oil cooler. Anything that touches raw water is critical to have a plan, and that plan needs to be developed based on how you use the boat. Weekend warriors need to have a different plan than let's say a group going up the Great Loop. Right, would have a different plan for scheduled maintenance and checkpoints and inspections. So it has to be based on the application of the vessel in terms of how often you're going to check these components.
Yeah.
Right.
One mistake I think a lot of people make is they think in terms of hours, and hours has nothing to do with seawater component maintenance.
100%.
Absolutely nothing to do with it, because it all comes down to what Tony calls marine age, which is as soon as you put components in salt water, they start to age in that marine environment. He calls that marine age. And so if you use your boat 3 or 4 times a year, you need to check your seawater stuff every 2 or 3 years. If you use your boat every day, you need to check your seawater stuff every 2 or 3 years. It really doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for a vessel owner that doesn't have the wherewithal and doesn't understand what freshwater flushing does to an engine, would need to inspect the hang-on components much more often, as opposed to a boat owner who is savvy to what the benefits of freshwater flushing can do. That will extend that that maintenance interval substantially.
Yeah.
Right. So a guy who uses his boat once a weekend, doesn't freshwater flush, should inspect his aftercooler, I would say between every 6 months to a year. Right.
Seems like a lot, but yeah.
you're leaving salt water in there for 6 days and 6 days. If it were me, I'm just giving you my opinion, as opposed to a guy who's freshwater flushing the vessel, you could extend that, like you said, out to a year or 2 years. I really, and again, this is a personal thing for me, but I really don't like to, if you're inspecting every 3 years, you have to really be very in tune with your boat and very in tune with your engine, to know how everything operates, and to let that maintenance interval go extend to that length.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that approach. Is if you take ownership of a boat, you should do the seawater maintenance right away. And the first time you do it, it might be a pain if the other person didn't stay up with it, getting everything apart and getting all the crud cleaned out. And it could be a challenge the first time. If you do it if you grease everything up and do it kind of the way the Seaboard way, you go to do it again in 6 months or a year, it's going to fly apart and go right back together super easy. Now, if you do that and then you're like, wow, this thing looks like it could. It didn't even look like I needed to do anything. So maybe next time I'll try a year and then maybe kind of extend it out based on what you're seeing. That's better than going, I'll just check it every, 3 or 4 years because so-and-so said so. Because it can vary too based on if you have a hot dock that eats up your zincs too fast, or if you have some other conditions, if you're in a different warmer climate versus colder climate, all these things can affect things. So it's good to kind of start with a shorter interval, and then based on what you're seeing, you can lengthen it as you feel comfortable.
100%. And what we always tell people when we talk on the phone is, you're basically wait, watch, and monitor, right? If the baseline you've established for that engine is staying consistent as you operate the vessel, then you can have a pretty high degree of confidence that those circuits are functioning as expected, right?
Yeah.
But you also have to be in tune with your vessel. If you see, let's say your boost values, or if you're monitoring EGT or other things like that, those trends are starting to shift in any one direction. That could be a catalyst for assessing some of those components on the engine, right?
Yep.
It's all about being in tune with how the boat operates.
Yep.
It's super important.
Yep. In your use case, yep.
Learning something new every day.
All right. Well, do you feel like we've answered most of your questions?
Well, many more questions will come up, so I'll be tuning back into the podcast.
That's the way it works.
Yeah.
I think that's some fantastic content. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I'm now on my way to put those freshwater flush fittings in.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the way to go.
Well, we thank you for spending time with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and hope you guys have a great rendezvous. And we'll be sharing this with you guys before the rendezvous. So thanks for calling in.
We're going to be talking about you.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Bye. All right. So, hello. You're on Boat Talk.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And who is this?
This is Rick McCabe. I'm the owner of a trawler, a Monk 36 trawler, Cummins powered. And I'm also the president of the Owners Association for the Monk 36.
Cool. Yeah, we just had a call with Neil. So,
welcome to the show.
Well, you were talking to the right guy. Thank you for the kind welcome, fellas. Hey, a couple things for you. As I go back and think about matters that have become interesting discussions in our association meetings, a couple of them come to mind. First, engine operating temperature. Now, Neil probably told you most of us are likely to have the Cummins 220 6BT. I do. And in a previous meeting, the discussion of whether or not the operating temperature was 180 degrees or 160 degrees. Now, the context was we were talking about the needs for replacing, the thermostat on occasion, and the different climates that we tend to operate in because the boats cruise great distances. And we actually had an argument over what the right number was. My mechanic a couple years ago, when my engine started operating a little warm, told me that it's probably the thermostat after we had a discussion on the details. he said, you have an option. You could just put a 160-degree thermostat in the boat, that in the engine, and that'll give you a little bit of margin for those times when you're traveling down south and whatnot. Now, I did that. So I'm wondering, and the boat, by the way, runs great with it at about 160, 165 degrees. And we're down south here in South Carolina. So I'd like your comments and your thoughts on this particular matter. Do we have that much liberty when the spec on the engine's tag says 180 degrees operating temperature to put in a cooler thermostat?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to kind of think about why the Cummins uses the 180 thermostat on the mechanical engine. And they tend to use colder thermostats on the electronic engines in the marine environment. And correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, but I think it's due to the fact that mechanical engines are not as good at compensating for various operating conditions. Mechanical engines, they don't have a computer to make this and a bunch of sensors to make decisions about, if you're running at this speed or that speed or any variables that happen. They don't have anything to correct for any of that. So in order to make sure you have kind of a clean burn, they just tend to run them a little hotter. I think that's one of the most, and I'm kind of guessing at this just from all the years and from talking to Tony, that if you run a little cooler and then you try to throttle up, let's say, you might see a little bit of smoke. If you're running at 160 degrees and then you go to try to, I don't know, pull a skier up behind your boat, you mash down the throttle.
Behind your trawler.
Behind your trawler. You mash down but see, that's what I was going to get at is with these trawlers, you guys are running at such a good, steady, happy state that even, I think that you're in a good place with a 160 degree thermostat, unless you're up in Alaska or going around, in the Arctic Circle. I don't know. What do you think, Corey?
Well, there's a lot of variables that need to be factored when you consider what thermostat. Number one is the performance of the cooling system. A lot of guys will switch thermostats if they're dealing with issues in their cooling system, right? There's a lot of components in the cooling system. You have a seawater pump, you have a transmission oil cooler, you have a heat exchanger, which is essentially the engine's radiator. And sometimes it's easy to throw in a lower temperature thermostat to mitigate something that's happening on that engine that isn't being addressed, which is obviously a bad thing.
That's a bad reason to do it.
That's a bad reason to do it. But there's really no argument that a diesel engine running warmer is more efficient. It is. That's why there's a 180 degree thermostat in that engine. Okay, but again, we're not assessing all the external variables. Like Justin said, if you're out in Alaska and the seawater is freezing, it would make sense to have a 180 degree thermostat to let the engine get up to temperature and run what we would consider peak performance, right? Now, if you're down here in California or you're down south where the water temperatures are warmer, it probably does make sense to run 160 degrees. Now, there's another thing that has to be assessed that's very critical. The overheat alarm on a Cummins engine is about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. So for guys running a mechanical diesel at 185 degrees, it doesn't give you a whole lot of space and room to, let's say, be reactive appropriately to some sort of issue, right? And we see this all the time. Guys will what we call cook an engine, because by the time you notice that the belt had come off the front of the engine and that the temperature is rising drastically, sometimes it's too late.
Right.
So again, that's something, this is all a part of risk management, right? So you might decide if you're in that kind of condition that having a 160 degree thermostat is worth the engine maybe operating at a little bit less peak performance, but having that margin of safety, right? So it's not always a black and white answer. It really has to do with all of the external conditions, putting those all together, and then making the best decision with all those factors, considered.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like with the way you guys run your boats so much, just at that sort of middle cruise range, I'd be willing to bet it'd almost be interesting if somebody had like some smog test equipment to see what's different coming out of the tailpipe with a 160 versus a 180 thermostat.
Right.
But I'd be willing to bet that there's a lot of overlap. Like you could kind of go either way because you're not pushing it hard. Think you're going to have a little more time to catch things if they go south.
100%.
And because you're not you're not varying your engine load and what you're demanding of the engine, it probably will burn pretty clean in that mid range, even at 160. So I think you guys, I would say experiment and see what kind of works for you. But if you like the idea of that extra headroom and safety margin, and you feel like your engine is burning clean enough, and you don't see any smoke, and
right, and I'll say this: I would give a different speech to a different type of boat owner, right? Someone who doesn't have a trawler, someone who has a planing hull.
yeah,
I would give a different speech, right? Because now this engine's running at very high RPM, very heavy loads.
right,
And I would say, now listen, don't worry about those external factors. You're in a condition where there's no way that you're going to have enough time to react to a catastrophic situation when that engine's running that high. It makes more sense to get a 160-degree thermostat. That's just the end of it, right? So again, it's always an it depends answer.
right. Yeah, no one size fits all.
That's great perspective and context. That probably has a lot to do with my mechanic's very experienced in operating in the area here. Probably why he used the exact same terms you did, additional margin for reaction. So thank you. That's terrific.
Yeah.
One other topic, another mechanic and a highly experienced training captain when I first bought the boat. We were going over the engine compartment and especially the 220, and the trainer captain pointed out to me that he said that you really ought to take a look at installing a closed crankcase recirculation system in the unit. Now, my only historical perspective on that is what is typically done through the PVC system on an automotive type engine, but we had a discussion on this that went on for a little while. His point was that first, your engine room will stay a lot cleaner. Secondly, it's good for the engine. That's probably an unfair synopsis, but I did install the Seaboard recirculation system. My specific question would be, your system has a reservoir bottle that's intended to connect or to collect effluent, and mine stays clean all the time. Can you talk a little bit about what my expectations ought to be and whether or not a clean reservoir for effluent is normal, or do I have something missing in the installation? Whatever.
I will say this: there's a wide varying degree of what we call engine blow-by. And engine blow-by is exactly that. It's any of the combustibles that are allowed to bypass into the crankcase. And once they get into the crankcase, they start moving around. So what a CCV system or a closed crankcase ventilation system is supposed to do is to kind of capture that blow-by, right? And put all of the really bad gross acids and things that are corrosive that we don't want to stay in the engine into that bottle. Now, I would say this, that the amount of stuff that goes into the bottle is generally a direct indication of the blow-by condition of the engine. In other words, an engine that is, let's say, has 10,000 hours and has never had an overhaul,
Run hard, not like a trawler.
Run hard, not like a trawler, exactly. At high RPMs under heavy loads, you could imagine that bottle would fill up, let's say in 6 months, maybe an inch or two of goop would collect in there and then ultimately be discarded. And that would be considered normal for an engine that's used in that condition. Now, an engine that's used in a trawler type condition, like Justin said earlier, that's pretty steady state in terms of loading and fuel burn, and if the engine, if you could look at the powertrain of the vessel and say that the engine is propped as to its efficient point, you would consider that engine would be kind of loafing around, not under heavy loads, not under variable conditions, pretty steady state, and you would expect that engine to not have a high blow-by.
Right.
And so for an engine like yours, not seeing a whole lot of what we call goop in the bottle would indicate that the engine is underloaded, which is a good thing, and is not allowing for a lot of blow-by, which is also a good thing. So I would look at that if I was just to visit your boat and come into the engine room and look at that, and you said there hasn't been anything in here for 6 months or a year, I'd say, wow, you have an engine that's performing where it needs to be performing, and good for you.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I've been very happy with the engine. I think it's terrific. It's easy to maintain, and I've really had no challenges with it. Thanks a lot, fellas. I think this has filled in a few blanks for me and for the folks that I represent.
Okay, awesome.
Take that to our upcoming meeting.
All right. Well,
thank you so much for participating. We appreciate it.
yeah, thanks for calling.
You bet.
All right. So those are some good calls.
Great phone calls. Great phone calls.
Yeah, our very first callers ever, and thanks to Neil and Rick. So now we're going to go to our next segment called Between Two Sterns.
Between Two Sterns.
This is where we tell a funny or amusing story from the world of boating. And
there's a lot of them out there.
There are. So I found a good story. I don't know exactly where I came across this, but it's just one that I picked up somewhere along the line. But basically, so let me set the stage. So, those beautiful coves. Let's say like we go to them in like Lake Nacimiento, but this is the saltwater world. So you're in the Caribbean or I don't know some ritzy island where they have those coves where everyone hangs out, sits at anchor and just drinks some beers, swims, all that kind of stuff.
Living your best life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the stage. There's a bunch of people. They're all hanging out. Bunch of guys drinking beers, some girls swimming, whatever, kids, the whole thing.
I like where this is going.
So this boat comes cruising up with a husband and a wife. And I don't know why this is important to the story, but apparently the wife's a looker. So all the guys are kind of paying attention. They're kind of like checking her out, of course, And it's a little breezy day, so they got to set anchor, right?
Okay.
So everyone's kind of sitting and watching. They're kind of noticing. And so they pull up and they go to start setting the anchor. And it's a smaller boat. So the husband sends the wife up to the bow to put the anchor out, right?
Simple
Starts
enough.
backing down and anchor doesn't catch. So he starts barking orders. He's getting frustrated. He motors forward. She pulls up the anchor. They try it again. And he's getting like, real, he's getting frustrated. He's kind of being a jerk, right? Third time, they go set the anchor. And so she's letting out. And he's like, you got to get a lot of scope, right? So she's letting it all the way out to the end. And he finally pushes her a little too far. And he says something. You, of course, you don't know what he said. But so she just sort of gently lets the anchor rope slide off the end of her hand and off the bow and into the water. And everyone's cheering. And he just puts it in gear and drives away with his, outdrive between his legs. So that's Between Two Sterns. So
Welcome.
yeah. So anyway, if you have an idea for a story, submit it to boattalk@sbmar.com.
Boattalk at sbmar.com.
That's BOATTALK at SBMAR.com. All right. So, well, thanks for listening.
Stay tuned for more content. There's going to be more content. I promise. I think.
Yeah, we'll be back in a few weeks unless, you're going fishing with Tony tomorrow.
I am going fishing with Tony.
So-
We're going to see how that goes.
See if you make it back.
Yikes. Yeah.
This could be our only episode. But yeah, thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.
Remember to send in those ideas.
Yeah.